there everyone, this is Sunanda and welcome to my channel. In today's class we will learn about Nelson Mandela Walk to Freedom. This is the second chapter for NCERT Class 10 from the book First Flight. So let's begin. Before we go deep into the chapter, let us know some facts about Nelson Mandela. We all know him, right? He was the first black president of South Africa. He was born on 18th July 1980 and he died on 5th December 2013. He dedicated his entire life for fighting against the apartheid policy that existed in South Africa, and he also was successful in establishing a democratic free nation. Later on, he became the first black president of his country. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and also Bharat Ratna for his contribution towards his nation. Now let's move on to the chapter. We will start with the theme of the chapter. Long Walk to Freedom is a portrayal of how Nelson Mandela sacrificed his life to remove the social inequalities from the country. So, this particular chapter is going to tell us about how Nelson Mandela has sacrificed his entire life for fight against the removal of social injustice that existed in his country. He said that he wanted a nation where he would be free to do as his thought. So he wanted a nation where he could have freedom of thought, he could have freedom of speech and action, right? The central theme is social inequality along with courage and sacrifice to remove it. So what is the main theme of the chapter? It is the removal of social inequality with courage and sacrifice. Okay. So now let's move on to the chapter summary of the chapter. The chapter is all about Nelson Mandela. Obviously, this chapter is all about Nelson Mandela. In this chapter, we will get detailed information about him. It begins with the description of the speeches and the inaugural ceremony of newly elected president. So, the chapter itself begins with the description of what? Speeches. Speeches regarding what? About the newly elected president and the inaugural ceremony. That is the oath-taking ceremony. The day was the oath-taking ceremony of the newly elected president, and that has been described in the beginning of the chapter. Who was the newly elected president? Obviously, Nelson Mandela. Thereafter, the chapter takes us to the first decade of 20th century when the white supremacy introduced the system of apartheid, made life of black-skinned people hell. So, after giving a short description of the inaugural ceremony of the newly elected president, the chapter takes us to the first decade of 20th century. Okay, what happens then? At that time, the white supremacy, who were these white supremacists? The Britishers. What they did, the Britishers, they introduced a system called apartheid, which was a policy, government policy, which segregated human on basis of their color. That is, they said that white people were superior and black men were inferior, and thus treated them like slaves. So the black-skinned people were treated like slaves and their life was made hell and miserable by this white supremacy, that is the Britishers. By how they did that? By introducing the policy of apartheid. Okay. Long Walk to Freedom is an autobiography written by South African President Nelson Mandela and was first published in 1994. So this particular chapter, this story, The Long Walk to Freedom, it is actually autobiography written by whom? By the person himself, that is Nelson Mandela. Autobiography are generally written by the person about his own life and experiences, right? So Nelson Mandela has written this autobiography named Long Walk to Freedom, where he has portrayed his own life and the struggle that he has gone through along with his followers to attain the success, that is the freedom of his country, to fight against the apartheid policy, to fight against the Britishers and attain freedom and democracy. Okay. And this autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, this was a book which was published in 1994. Okay. The book profiles his early life, coming of age and 27 years in prison. So what does this book tells us about? It tells us in detail about his life, about the life of Nelson Mandela, his early life, his adulthood, his struggle, his fight against the Britishers, and 27 years in prison. Just imagine a person spending 27 years behind the bars. For what? For his nation. He sacrificed his life for the nation, for the attaining the freedom of his nation, and he spent 27 years in prison for that. Okay. The chapter describes his political ascension and his belief that struggle still continued against apartheid in South Africa. So this particular chapter tells us about his political ascension, means his development. Okay, his success in politics, that has been well portrayed in this chapter, and also his belief that in spite of getting freedom, in spite of attaining democracy, they still need to fight against this apartheid in South Africa. That is, this policy continued even after they attained their freedom, so they need to fight it even after getting freedom, or even after getting democratic country, they have to fight against this policy. So this was his belief. So this has been well portrayed in the chapter. His political ascension, that is his development in political field, as well as his beliefs in politics, about his ideas that they need to still fight against this policy in South Africa. Even after getting freedom, they have to still fight against apartheid policy. After great struggle, democratic elections were held in Africa. Obviously, we all know after reading the chapter that this is where we have been told about the struggle that the black-skinned South African had to go through to attain freedom against the Britishers. And after this long period of struggle, what happened? This was the first time that they are having a democratic elections. Okay, and who was elected as the first president of this election? Obviously, we know Nelson Mandela. In this first democratic election that was held in Africa after they got freedom, Nelson Mandela was elected to be their first black president. Okay. In this chapter, Mandela paid tribute to all the heroes and patriots who waged a struggle against racist regime of South Africa. So this is also a chapter which tells us that Mandela has paid tribute through his autobiography. In this autobiography, Mandela has paid tribute to each and every one of the heroes and the patriots who fought for their country, who struggled against this racism and brought freedom in their country. They have sacrificed their life, sacrificed their entire life, or maybe they have embraced death in order to bring freedom to their country. So in this particular autobiography, Mandela has paid tribute to each one of them, each of the black heroes and the patriots who sacrificed their life or who waged war against this racism. Okay. So I hope you have understood this chapter. It's a beautiful chapter. It's an autobiography written by Nelson Mandela himself, where he depicts the life story, his own life story, the struggles and the period of imprisonment that he had to go through in order to help his country attain freedom. He has also used his autobiography to pay tribute to all the black heroes and patriots who have sacrificed their life to help their nation attain freedom. So in this autobiography, we will get to know in detail about his early life, that is Nelson Mandela's early life, as well as his struggling periods, and also his success in political career, and his imprisonment, 27 years of imprisonment that he had to go through in order to attain this success. Okay. And it also tells us, this particular chapter opens with the description of the inaugural ceremony of the newly elected president, where ceremony was arranged for the oath-taking ceremony of the newly elected president, and dignitaries and international leaders were invited to attend this particular ceremony. This has been described in this chapter as well. So I hope you have understood this chapter, and in case you have any doubt, do let me know in the comment section. Now let's move on to the question and answers. Question number 1. Where did the ceremony take place? We all know what ceremony we are talking about. The question has been asked. The ceremony of oath-taking ceremony of the newly elected president has been talked about. Now, where has this ceremony has taken place? The ceremony took place in the campus of Union Building of Pretoria, which was attended by dignitaries and leaders of many nations. So the question is, where did the ceremony take place? The answer is, the ceremonies took place in the campus of Union Building of Pretoria, which were attended by dignitaries and leaders of many nations. That is, the oath-taking ceremony of the newly elected president was held over here, and it was attended by whom? By dignitaries and the leaders of many nations. So international leaders also came in and joined in this ceremony. So it was a huge honor for everybody in Africa, right? Can you say how 10th May is an autumn day in South Africa? The answer is, as South Africa is in southern hemisphere, May falls in the autumn season. Thus, 10th May is an autumn day. So the question has been asked, why 10th May is called autumn day? Because 10th May in India is not autumn day, right? But why is in Africa it is autumn day? Because South Africa is in southern hemisphere. Okay, that is why May falls in the autumn season, and that is why 10th May is an autumn day. And why is 10th May so important? Because on this day, this oath-taking ceremony was to take place, where the newly elected president Nelson Mandela was to take his oath as a president. Okay. So I hope you have understood question number 1 and 2. Now let's move on to question number 3. What does Mandela mean by an extraordinary human disaster? What does this line mean? An extraordinary human disaster? Mandela meant to state the practice of apartheid in South Africa. So we have already heard about this word apartheid in the chapter, that it was a government policy introduced by the Britishers to segregate human race on basis of color. That is, they treated the black Africans as slave and also made their life miserable. They thought them to be inferior creatures, right? So that was the apartheid policy, and Mandela throughout his entire life fought against this policy. During this, there was a racial segregation based on color. As I said, it was a segregation based on color, and the blacks suffered. Obviously, if the blacks were tortured, they will suffer. They were not allowed to demand freedom or any rights. So see the miserable condition of the black-skinned Africans. They were treated like slaves and they were denied any freedom or any rights. So this is what Mandela and his followers fought against, and they achieved success as well. So what does Mandela mean by an extraordinary human disaster? Answer is, Mandela meant to state the practice of apartheid in South Africa. During this time, there was a racial segregation based on color, and blacks suffered a lot. They were not allowed to demand freedom or any right. I hope you have understood question number 3. Now let's move on to question number 4. Why does Mandela thank the international leaders for? Answer, Mandela felt very privileged to welcome the international leaders at the swearing-in ceremony, because not too long ago South Africans were considered outlaws. So why did Mandela thank the international leaders? Because it was not long before that South Africans were considered to be outlaws. They were not treated as equals, right? But now, on this day when South Africa has attained their freedom, they have attained democracy. Now they are having their first election, and this was after the election. This was a swearing in ceremony, that is the oath-taking ceremony of the newly elected president, and all the dignitaries and the international leaders have come in to join on this ceremony. So this was a great honor for the South Africans, and Mandela felt he felt very privileged, and that is why he thanked and welcomed the international leaders, because not very long before this incident, these South Africans were treated as outlaws. They were treated as outsiders. Okay. Thus, he thanked all of them for having to come to witness this historical ceremony. This ceremony, this oath-taking ceremony, was a historical ceremony or a historical event in the history of South Africa, because prior to this, the blacks were tortured. But now, this president has been elected from among those black Africans only. Okay, so they have become victorious. They have attained their freedom. So this was a historical ceremony, and he thanked all the dignitaries and international leaders who came in to join this historical ceremony. That is the oath-taking swearing ceremony of the first elected black president of South Africa. This was a gesture of international recognition to a newly born free democratic nation. So this was a incident where South Africa got international recognition. And why was it so important to get an international recognition? Because it was just a newly born free democratic nation. So it was just born. It became newly free. So it was a newly born free democratic nation which needed international attention. And that is what it got on this particular day. That is why he felt privileged. Mandela felt very privileged, and he welcomed and thanked all the international leaders to come and witness this historical ceremony in South Africa. So I hope you understand question number 4. Why does Mandela thank the international leaders? Mandela felt very privileged to welcome the international leaders at the swearing-in ceremony, because not too long ago South Africans were considered outlaws. Thus, he thanked all of them for having to come to witness the historical ceremony. This was a gesture of international recognition to a newly born, free, democratic nation, that is South Africa. Now let's move on to the last question, question number 5. What ideals does Nelson Mandela set for the future of South Africa? So what were his ideals, or what he wanted in future to happen in South Africa? Nelson Mandela set the ideals of liberating people from bondage of poverty, deprivation and suffering. So this was his ideals. He wanted to free the South Africans from bondage of poverty, deprivation and suffering. He also set the ideal for a society free from all sort of prejudices and discrimination. So he wanted to build a nation which would prevent their people from suffering and also free them from all sort of prejudices and discriminations. So this was a dream for Nelson Mandela, that he want to set a country where people will be free from the bondage of poverty, deprivation and sufferings, and they will also have a society which will be free from all sort of prejudices and discrimination. That is, he wanted to put a full stop to all the social discrimination and inequalities that South Africa has been suffering for decades. He had a strong voice against the apartheid policy introduced by the Britishers in South Africa, which segregated people on basis of color and discriminated them. He wanted to stop that, and he believed that even after attaining freedom and democracy, they still need to fight on this policy. They still need to fight against apartheid policy and all the discrimination and prejudices that exist. Okay, so they needed, he always had his ideas and goals set for the future of South Africa. They were to liberate the people of South Africa from the bondage of poverty, deprivation and suffering, and also to free the society from any sort of prejudices or discrimination. So I hope you have understood question number 5. So this was it. This is a chapter. We have finished it. I hope you have understood the chapter as well as the question answers. It is an autobiography written by Nelson Mandela and it was published in 1994. In this autobiography, we get to know in detail about the early life, the political accession, the imprisonment and the struggle and success that Nelson Mandela had in his life. That is, he fought against all the social injustices along with his followers. He was also imprisoned for 27 years, but in spite of all this struggle, he ultimately achieved success. He was successful in eradicating social injustice and establishing a free democratic nation. And not only that, he also went on to become the first elected black president of South Africa. In case you have any doubt regarding the chapter or the question answers, do let me know in the comment section. Till then, keep watching and please don't forget to share, subscribe and like my channel. Thank you.